Amidst all the fallout from BYU's loss to Texas Tech on Saturday, there is one good thing that came out of it that will help BYU get back on track against TCU.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. We are proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network, America's #1 sports podcast network. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer at the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, a 14-year credentialed media member, and I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we are going to talk about BYU and the outcome of Texas Tech actually helping them get a win over TCU. Allow me to explain that momentarily. Then we'll talk about the college football playoff rankings we're expecting to see later tonight. What I think BYU is going to end up being ranked in those. Then we'll finish up today's show on the basketball front, looking ahead to tonight's showdown against the Delaware Blue Hens. It's all ahead on today's show, and it's all brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers right now come at just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets, courtesy of our friends over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com or download the app to get started today. All right, so after BYU lost to Texas Tech, obviously the carnage, the fallout, everything that came out of that game has Cougar fans on edge, and understandably so, because BYU saw their perfect season go by the wayside. It feels in some ways much like it did a season ago when BYU started 9-0 and then dropped back-to-back games that ultimately cost them their chance to play for a Big 12 title. Well, I can't blame Cougar fans if that's the way you feel about this circumstance. But there is one thing that I've been thinking about, and it came to my mind as I was doing a guest hosting appearance on the Loyal Cougars podcast with Jake Edmonds and Tosh McIntosh over there. And we were talking yesterday about how much pressure had been on BYU in building towards that game against Texas Tech. And there was a bunch of pressure. Remember, BYU had College Game Day there in Lubbock. They had done a countless number of interviews. Kalani Sitake, BYU players like Bear Bachmeyer. It felt like they were appearing on every national platform that seemed to request them. And I don't blame BYU for obviously putting those guys front and center. When you are 8-0, you're one of the final four teams that's undefeated on a season. People want to talk to you. People want to talk about how you've accomplished what you've accomplished. But after BYU lost that game to Texas Tech, I would venture to say that if there is a single national media member who reaches out to BYU for a one-on-one with Kalani Sitake or anybody else inside the BYU football program, I would like to meet that person because they are a bold soul. I love the fact that BYU is going to have that pressure, the buildup of everything that had been going on to that point in the season taken off of them. Kalani Sitake talked about it yesterday, that they're going to circle the wagons and focus on everybody inside that locker room. That's exactly what I want to hear from BYU's head coach, and that's what I want this BYU football program to do. I'm not trying to come off as some Pollyanna-ish pie in the sky. I think you guys know me who've been listening to this podcast long enough that I've got a pretty good track record of being pretty level-headed on this. But I think the situation BYU finds itself in is now as they look to rebound against TCU, you don't need the outside noise being louder than it ever has been before, because it got really loud in the lead up to that Texas Tech game. And as I mentioned, I don't blame BYU, anybody inside the BYU football program, for talking to the national media. When you're hot, guess what? That is the time to strike. That obviously offers recruiting opportunities, allows you to grow the brand, put BYU on a national platform. I don't blame them for doing that. But now that you have lost that game and lost in the manner that you did, a lot of people are counting you out. And these are the scenarios that in previous iterations of Kalani Sitake's tenure at BYU, even looking back to last year, when BYU feels slighted, they're being disrespected, they're being overlooked, they thrive, absolutely thrive in these scenarios. So that is what gives me hope that BYU is going to go out there and handle their business on Saturday night when they take on the TCU Horned Frogs. It is, in many respects, a perfect scenario for a comeback story for BYU, because as we have reiterated time and time again on yesterday's podcast, going back to the postcast over the weekend in the aftermath of the loss, nothing, and I mean nothing, that BYU hopes to accomplish this season has been taken away from them, or at least taken out of their hands. If BYU wins 3 games the rest of the season, they beat TCU this weekend, then they beat Cincinnati the following week, and then they finish up with a senior night game or senior day, whatever the kickoff ends up being against UCF. If they handle their business in those 3 games, there's a very, very strong likelihood that they're already probably a lock for the college football playoff at worst as an at-large bid. You're on your way guaranteed to the Big 12 title game with hopefully a rematch against the Texas Tech Red Raiders with some revenge on your mind going down to Arlington, Texas. And quite literally everything that BYU talked about in terms of wanting to go from good, as they mentioned, 11-2 a year ago, being good to great. That means competing for a Big 12 title, competing in the college football playoff for a national championship. That would fully accomplish the good to great mantra that BYU has embraced this season. And this week, it's going to prove a lot. This is the most critical week of the 3 weeks ahead in my mind, because either BYU learned their lesson from a season ago, losing the back-to-back games to Kansas and Arizona State that ultimately cost them that opportunity to go to Arlington, Texas, or they're going to show that they've grown up, they've realized their mistakes, they've rebounded, they circled the wagons, as Kalani Sitake said. They focused on who's in that locker room, and they go out there and put some aggression out on the field to take it out on the TCU Horned Frogs. That is, in many respects, the best case scenario that I could envision for the BYU football program at this juncture, because that's exactly what BYU needs to focus on right now, is them inside the locker room. Don't worry about the outside noise. And I say that as a guy who is part of that outside noise. I do a daily podcast that talks and pontificates on this football program and the basketball program, and I espouse to talk a lot of other BYU things, but that's my focus. So I say that as a guy who is part of the distraction, but understand what I'm saying is that BYU has had the pressure cooker that they were existing in, that fishbowl they were existing in, taken off of them. The whole glamour, the whole spotlight that was on BYU, that's gone. It's taken away. But now all you got to do is handle your business from here on out. Win and you're in, and life is good in Cougar Nation, because they can still accomplish everything, and I reiterate, everything they set out to accomplish this season. Pretty good scenario, I think, in my mind, just trying to, find the positive in all the aftermath of that loss to Texas Tech. But it's not as bleak as some might paint it on social media or some of your Cougar fans who feel like the sky is falling. The Cougars have not lost control of a single thing that they hope to accomplish this season, but they have to handle their business beginning this week against TCU. All right, coming up next, college football playoff rankings are coming out tonight, and BYU is getting some love from certain people I would not have expected it from, but also there are the clowns out there who want to essentially denigrate and take down BYU in the Big 12 with it. We'll explain what's going on and what I predict in these college football playoff rankings coming out later on this evening, and we'll get to that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, college football is here, and obviously we all couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stand, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets to the games can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout, and that's just a few of the different issues that can pop up. That's why I want you guys to do what I do and use Game Time. It is the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. It is my favorite feature of all of them on Game Time. I say that all the time. The best part is that makes it super simple. You can see your exact seat view before you buy your tickets. As I mentioned, there are no surprise fees or taxes or whatever it is being tacked on at the end. And honestly, it's the fastest, cheapest, and least stressful way than any other way I've bought tickets. And I want you guys to give it a shot as well. So take guesswork out of buying your tickets and do it with our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Against the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network America's #1 sports network. Could not do it without you guys. If you have not done so already, please subscribe, rate, and review, share with your family and friends. And the one thing I want to encourage you guys to do right here, if you're on YouTube, there's a little thumbs up button. It's called the like button. hit it. Simple as that. That makes a absolutely incredible difference with the algorithms, that exist out there with these platforms, and help us build this audience. So thank you in advance for your support. All right, so college football playoff rankings round 2 come out tonight, and BYU, obviously ranked 7th by virtue of their loss to Texas Tech, is going to slide down those rankings. The good news is I think there is what I would call an artificial backstop for where BYU ultimately could slide to, and this is just me speaking, and I also acknowledge the College Football Playoff Committee, its history with BYU is one of utter frustration. Remember, when BYU lost to Kansas a year ago as the number 6 team in the country, they slid from 6 to 14 and really never got back off the deck, to use that expression, in terms of a chance to get back into the college football playoff, and ultimately had to settle for the Alamo Bowl a year ago. Think back to 2020 and that COVID year and BYU's incredible run, then just never really got any traction, it felt like, with the playoff committee then. So I say all of that, rehashing that painful history, to say this. I think this playoff committee, at least from the first iteration of those rankings, is different this year. And I think that they are actually going to be lenient when it comes to BYU. I say I'm saying with a question mark, because in some ways I am. Here's the deal. Over the weekend, the ACC saw their 2 top teams in terms of rankings, both Louisville at 15 and Virginia at 14, both get beat. So essentially, the ACC is going to backslide and slide further down the rankings. Utah is at number 13, was idle over the weekend alongside Oklahoma and Texas, who I think were 10 and 11, if I recall correctly. So I look at this. If the playoff committee values head-to-head results, the artificial barrier that I believe has been created here is 12 for BYU. That's where I think they ultimately could slide to. Now, if this playoff committee, as I mentioned, is going to be lenient, they could end up sliding to maybe, 10? Because they lost to a fellow top 10 team. Now, it was in pretty ignominious fashion because you got absolutely trounced and blown out by the Texas Tech Red Raiders. But we'll see how it all shakes out. But my prediction, I'll put it right now on for the masses, is I think BYU checks in at number 11. That's where I think they check in. I think Utah checks in at 12. Could I be wrong about that? Sure. But I think that's where BYU will ultimately slide to in these rankings. But that still means you're absolutely in the mix when it comes to the college football playoff, as I mentioned earlier, so long as you handle your business down the stretch run of the season here. Now, the other situation at hand is now with the ACC appearing that it's going to slide down the rankings, they are very much working, scrounging, fighting, clawing for just a single bid in the college football playoff. We have people out there actually stumping for BYU who just kicked BYU's butt, and that would be the one, the only, Joey McGuire. If you didn't see this, he said this earlier this week. I think it was actually yesterday. He said this: I have so much respect for BYU. I do. I was really excited about whenever they joined the Big 12 because I think they carry a lot of weight and a lot of respect. I think I have a lot of respect for them entering a conference and not playing an independent schedule like other people. Y'all already know who that is. I'll insert, it's Notre Dame. So I have a lot of respect for them. I mean, they're earning their right just like everybody, but a couple of people in the nation who are earning their right through conference play and playing in some really tough places, unquote. So we got the guy who just beat BYU saying that BYU is playoff caliber and should still remain in the mix. But the other issue on the flip side of that is we have guys like Greg Sankey out here who are saying that the SEC should have 6, maybe 8 of the playoff spots. Now, I understand that Greg Sankey thinks he's the you-know-what, the bee's knees, and he's going to stump for his programs to go out there and take the lion's share of the college football playoff berths. That does not mean that the Big Ten is going to sit idly by, because I guarantee they're going to have Tony Petitti start stumping. We already saw yesterday, if you didn't see it, the ACC on social media is doing blind resume tests, actually essentially pumping up Miami over Notre Dame because they realize, holy smokes, we are way off the pace here when it comes to the playoffs. And the good news is, I think for the Big 12 is where BYU, Texas Tech, and Utah were placed in those initial rankings, even with BYU's loss, the Big 12 looks like it has a very valid shot at getting 2 teams in. And if these 3 teams essentially win out down the stretch, you're going to have a college football playoff committee who's going to have a little bit of a dilemma on their hands, trying to justify leaving 1, maybe 2 of those teams out of the playoff field. You want to hear a bunch of people screaming, hooting, and hollering? Leave multiple Big 12 teams on the outside of the playoff and do as Lord Sankey demands and put 6, 7, 8 SEC teams in there. You want to see college football revolt? bend the knee, kiss the ring of the SEC, and see how that's going to work out for you. I'm saying that directly to the College Football Playoff Committee. I have got hope that Mack Rhoades, as the athletic director at Baylor, I'm not asking him to put anything in terms of improprieties out there, but understand that there is more than just the SEC and the Big Ten and the so-called Big Two. The Big 12 has got some pretty darn good football programs, none better than Texas Tech. And I think Texas Tech on a normal day is going to be very capable of advancing in the college football playoff. But give them a chance. Give the Big 12 a chance to get multiple teams in, and let's see what the Utes, the Cougars, and or the Red Raiders can do in this playoff field if they prove worthy. I'm not putting the cart before the horse here. You have to do the work. BYU has to win out. Utah has to win out. Texas Tech has to win out, and ultimately see what happens. But the nice part is where these programs are positioned right now has them in a catbird seat or has them in a very advantageous position to push for as many as 3 playoff bids. The thing you need to look out for is the SEC cannibalizing itself, so having some of their top teams get upset by teams who maybe just a little bit lower than them in the rankings, but that only would embolden a guy like Greg Sankey to pump up the depth and breadth because, it just means more for the SEC. You also have the Tony Petitti out there saying that, well, we've got Ohio State and Indiana, but that does not mean that the likes of, Michigan shouldn't be considered. They're all going to play the political game, and I'm looking to see what Brett Yormark does to fight fire with fire because there's no playing nice with these guys. You have to fight fire with fire, and I hope that the Big 12 starts putting out something that is going to essentially espouse how strong the top of the Big 12 is, and based on those rankings, the Cougars, the Utes, and the Red Raiders are in position to make a run at that playoff. So as hard as it may be to admit, you may be rooting for the Utes to run right alongside the Cougars in the final stanza of the season because it only helps enhance the image of the Big 12 conference and also, I think, take some of that fire away from the SEC and the Big 10 and show that, hey, there are more than just 2 conferences out there. The Big 12, it's got something to say. And the hope is that if we get multiple teams, speaking pejoratively, like just from like the big picture side of things, if the Big 12 does get the multiple teams in, can't go over. You've got to have 1 or at least 2 of the teams hopefully advance and show what they're capable of on a national stage. Otherwise, a lot of people are like, see, told you couldn't compete. That's kind of the flip side of all of this. All right, so there you go. We'll see what happens. I think BYU finishes at 11 in those rankings tonight, and we'll see if I'm right, and we'll react to it. I'll see if I can watch. I'm going to be a BYU basketball. I don't know. We'll see if we can fit in a live podcast at some point along the way here, but stay tuned for that later on this evening. All right, coming up next, though, let's talk BYU basketball. As I mentioned, I'm going to be at the Marriott Center tonight. I'm sure there are going to be thousands of you who are there as well. BYU plays their 3rd non-conference game of the season. It's against the Delaware Blue Hens. What to know about Delaware? We'll get into that next as we continue on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action with our friends at FanDuel, as they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're at the start of a game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks and everything in between. Plus, you can even combine those live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout along that same path. And the best part is it keeps every game more exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. And if basketball's not your jam, they've got football odds. They've got everything, it feels like, when it comes to your sports betting needs. So right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up today and play your game with FanDuel, as they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, sign up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Got some fun new perks coming, by the way, to the Insider Group. And if you want to be a part of it, get in now. Get a 14-day free trial, just $5 a month to be a member of the group. And hope you guys are getting the intel that you crave, because it's insider intel that I feel like is pretty relevant information. So join us today. Get the inside scoop you want, all things BYU, and do it as a member of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, so BYU basketball is returning to action tonight in the Marriott Center for their 2nd straight home game against the Delaware Blue Hens. Now, what you need to know about Delaware is it is the first ever meeting between these 2 programs. They've never played before in their histories, and the Delaware Blue Hens are much like Holy Cross, where they are 0-2 on the season, and they actually have a pretty rough loss. Now, being from Delaware, obviously, there's not a ton of land in that state, but they played Wilmington, which is a Division II program from Delaware, and lost that game 71-62 this past weekend. They obviously opened the season with a 78-70 loss to Bucknell. So Delaware's coming in as a team that BYU, much like Holy Cross, should be able to just roll over and absolutely dominate in this game. Names to know from Delaware real quick. Christian Bliss is their leading scorer at 14.5 points per game. And then Macon Emery, their forward, he's averaging 12 points and 12 rebounds. So not bad statistics, but once again, it's very early on the season, and 12 and 12, nothing to not pay attention to, but it is only through 2 games for an 0-2 team. What I'm looking forward to tonight from BYU is I want to see BYU work on 2 things that I think that they know. Yeah, it's 2 things in particular. I may add a third because it's kind of attached to one of these. But there are 2 key things I want to see from BYU. The number one thing I want to see improvement on is BYU on the offensive glass. If you've been paying attention, as I mentioned, it's only 2 games in, but BYU has been out-rebounded on the offensive glass by both teams they have played. They lost the offensive rebounding battle 17-12 to Villanova in the season opener and 9-4 to Holy Cross in that game last Saturday. Now, they won both of those games. They move up in the national rankings, by the way, checking in at number 7 yesterday in the new AP poll. So mark of respect for BYU getting the wins that they did, but at some point in the relatively near future, maybe as soon as this Saturday when BYU takes on UConn, the offensive rebounding woes that BYU suffered early on the season could rear its ugly head and cost them in a big way. I don't know what it's going to take. It's probably going to take a more concerted effort from everybody on the roster, AJ DeBonce, Rob Wright, Kennard Davis Jr., Richie Saunders, to help a guy like Keba Keita out there on the court in terms of the starting lineup for BYU to rebound at a higher level and generate extra looks on the offensive glass. I look at it and it feels like in so many ways that Keba essentially is the only guy out there who is capable of securing a big rebound. But I think guys like AJ DeBonce have got the skill set, the body type to go out there and do just that. So I want to see an improvement on the offensive glass. I would like to see BYU actually win the offensive rebounding battle and show that they can do that against Delaware, because Delaware and Holy Cross, they're some of the worst teams on paper BYU is going to face this season. You need to show that you can assert yourself and do things that have been a weakness for you to this point against teams of that ilk, so you can get better as the season progresses against teams like a UConn team later on this week. The other thing I want to see from BYU is an improvement in the 3-point shooting. Now, Kevin Young talked about it after the game on Saturday, that this year's roster construction was a little bit different. It's more about having versatility on that lineup, but one of the questions coming into the year is, outside of Richie Saunders, who are your proven 3-point shooters who can 40+% from the arc? Well, so far on the season, BYU is 12 of 42, shooting a paltry 28.6% from beyond the arc. That number is not sustainable. And I know that a guy like Kevin Young, he knows these numbers better than I do, and he knows the advanced analytics better than I ever will. But I can assure you that 12 of 42 is not what he was expecting from this team. I'm also, once again, reiterating, it's essentially to say there's only 2 games in, and there's plenty of time for BYU to correct that. But you need to see this team show an improvement at its shot selection from beyond the arc, and more importantly, start to make shots from beyond the arc. I can accept that that a guy like Richie Saunders, the season opener, he's been puking all day. He definitely didn't look himself against Villanova, and he had a poor shooting night that night. Well, what BYU did against Holy Cross is, okay, if you guys want to defend the perimeter and make sure you're not going to shoot our threes, we'll go right to the rim and score on you. Maybe that's what Delaware's game plan is going to be as well, and BYU will score another 60-plus points in the paint. Hey, it's a high percentage shot. It's the highest percentage shots in basketball when it comes to a slam dunk and the like, and obviously gets the crowd going when guys like AJ DeBonce and Richie, and in the case of AJ, he's encouraging guys even like Dawson Baker to dunk the basketball. If you didn't see that viral clip on social media, that was pretty funny. Can somebody tell Dawson Baker to dunk the basketball? It's pretty funny. It was great. But the point is, it depends on how teams are going to defend you. And if they are intent on defending the perimeter, okay, great. Go to the rim and score at the rim. But there are still enough opportunities in games like this against an overmatched Delaware Blue Hens team that you should be able to drive and kick and work on those 3-point shots. Now, is it going to be perfect? No. And do I expect BYU to shoot better than 50%? Probably not either. It'd be nice to see that, because that would show that they've started to round into form in terms of hitting their shots. But I want to see Richie start hitting from beyond the arc. I want to see a guy like Kennard Davis Jr., AJ DeBonta, Robert Wright III. All of these guys are going to be critical key pieces to any and all success that BYU hopes to have this season. And as many people talk about the NBAification of college basketball, well, it's being led by guys like Kevin Young. And he has been adamant in saying that essentially BYU's offense is either beyond the arc or at the rim. There is very little to no mid-range game. There's not the Tyler Haws coming off the screen at the elbow and shooting that jumper. That doesn't exist in this offense that Kevin Young has put on the court. So if you're going to live by his, I guess, stated goals of what he wants to see from BYU's offense, we need to see an uptick in the three-point shooting. Now, the flip side of that, in terms of those three-point shooting is that it obviously lends itself to opening yourself up for fast breaks the other way for long rebounds. BYU's defense has been pretty darn good for long stretches so far in the 2 games that they have played, but transition defense is something that I want to see more of from BYU, is their ability to stop breaks from happening. Now, is Delaware going to be the type of team that's going to really be able to break on you and really make you pay for it? TBD. But it's another chance, as I mentioned, to work on different parameters and different facets of the game that obviously are going to be critical parts of success you're going to need to have later on as tougher games come in the non-conference slate. And also, obviously, once Big 12 play arrives. I'm looking forward to this. And I know that the Holy Cross game, I actually walked past a guy. I was walking around the concourse at halftime going to see a buddy. And I overheard him say, well, we can go home now. That game's over. And it very well might be that same case tonight against Delaware. But it is still an opportunity to watch guys like AJ DeBonta play in a Cougar uniform, because you're not going to see that many of them. And all reality, if BYU does make that hopeful run in the Final Four, that type of deal, is it 41, 42 games at most you're able to watch him? So take advantage of all the opportunities you have to watch guys like this, but also keep an eye out for improvements BYU will try to make along the way when it comes to their overall gameplay and overall game plans along the way. All right, so that's going to do it for today's edition of the show. Coming up tomorrow, reaction to BYU's placement in the college football playoff rankings. Obviously looking forward to a big weekend ahead. More on BYU and TCU. I'm going to be down at practice for football, hoping to catch up with a player or a coach. I'll put in some requests for those, so I'll hopefully have that for you guys on tomorrow's show as well. And as always, thank you truthfully for all y'all support. You guys are absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review the show, and like it if you're watching this on YouTube. Click that thumbs up button and help us build this audience as we've been doing for quite a while now, but obviously any and all help is appreciated. So until tomorrow, everybody, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Now make your second listen. Our friends, Drake Toll over at Locked On Big 12, your second listen of the day. And we'll catch you guys again tomorrow right here on, as an everydayer, right on here. Keep butchering this, right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.